On? Yeah, okay. Thank you for having me. I'm going to read two pieces of flash. One is fiction and the other is nonfiction. The first one's fiction and it's called While the Water Boils. The sun is hot, very hot, and two brothers are wrestling in the backyard while their mother is in the kitchen boiling water for hot dogs and macaroni. The older brother says to the younger brother, "You'll never be strong enough." And the younger brother charges the older brother, a quick jolt to the waist. He means to push the older brother as hard as he does, but he doesn't intend for him to fall backwards, to miss the grass, to slam his neck on the lip of the pool, the fastest and slowest moment in both of their lives. The older brother falling toward a life where he will have to be fed, to be wiped, to adjust to not using his limbs. He won't be pitching in his game on Monday or attending the late summer dance, and the younger brother will be falling too, falling towards nightmares that will never stop, his mother shrieking over and over, and instead of saying, "Dinner's ready, boys," like she was supposed to, he will only hear, "What have you done? What have you done?" Um, and then this is my nonfiction piece. A few years ago, I had the privilege of interviewing a Holocaust survivor, and I thought the best way to tell her story was to create a flash nonfiction piece. And I chose to read this today, given our current climate in the world, and I think it's more important than ever to consider systematic oppression in language and how it defines a people. So hopefully we can learn from history and do better, but we have a long way to go. So this is called number 1913. Before the horror, before their neighbors started hating them, before they were forced to speak Czech instead of Hebrew or Yiddish, then German instead of any of these, before their school teacher beat them with rulers in front of schoolmates because they were Jews, before the low whispers of fear and the talk of things changing for the worse and the replies of no, it can't, could never happen in this country, our country, could not happen in our home. Before their father was taken away first, and throughout the whole war they held on to hope that a young, strong man like him had survived, only to learn he was killed, shot down upon his first few minutes at the camp. Before she and her sister Helen were separated from their mother and younger siblings, only to find out later that they had died with the millions who were told they were showering, only to be engulfed in toxic gas. Before the gray and death-filled months in Auschwitz, the crammed lager, the cacophony of wails each night, the rats that fell on their faces in the dark, and the flies that fed on what was left of their flesh, the unrelenting smell of death. Before she and Helen were placed in separate lines during selection, and she pulled her sister back with her, and a guard separated them, and she pulled her back again, and they were separated again, and she ran to the youngest SS she could find and cried and screamed in a tongue that was not her own, "She's my sister, she's my sister," and by some miracle they were placed together and sent to work instead of to die. Before the factory where she and Helen were sent to work, where they were starved and beaten and forced to ask 4 times before they could use the bathroom, while a woman watched and taunted them, which wasn't often anyway because of the hunger, oh the hunger, a fistful of horse meat and a crumb of stale bread a day, flesh made jagged by bones underneath, the dragging bitter days, one thin dress and a pair of wooden shoes for frigid winters, a 2.5-mile walk to the factory. Oh, how freezing we were, hungry and freezing, mindless work, slave work. They weren't told what they were making, what the parts were for, why their hands were bleeding and their eyes heavy and their minds void of dreaming, because the moment they dreamt, the moment they had an alternate to the hell they were living, it made it more real. It's best to check out, give up on dreams sometimes. On one of these factory days, when number 1913 couldn't tell if it was night or day, when her feeble body worked to put together parts she didn't know what for, a local man walked along the path outside. One look in the gate and he ran through the doors, demanding to know what was going on, why these young girls looked the way they did. The SS, stumbling for a cover, told the unwanted witness that the girls were prostitutes, only prostitutes. Prostitutes! To think anyone would have wanted us in that state. Our heads were shaved, our bodies weak. We were ugly, sick and ugly. The civilian yelled at the SS, told him he knew they were children, asked why they were being mistreated. The officer took out his gun, told the man if he didn't leave, he'd be shot in the face. The man left as quickly as he'd come in. Before the bombs were dropped that forced the SS to run and retreat, while she, Helen, and the other surviving girls from the factory in Hamburg were being lined up in front of shallow graves to be shot for no reason other than surviving, because they were evidence of the horror, the atrocity, the unthinkable. Before all of this, she and her 5 siblings lived on a farm in Prekopa, Czechoslovakia, where they ran through fields and played on hills until it was time to help their mother prepare for dinner. She would help the younger children wash their hands, teach the older girls how to cook, and hang the clothes to dry. She would smooth their hair and lick her finger to remove dirt from their cheeks. Afterwards, there was the boat ride and her recovery in Sweden, where she weighed 60 pounds despite her 15 years of age and couldn't eat solid food for 6 weeks and didn't have hair and didn't recognize herself in the mirror and laughed at the eyes looking back at her, because if she took one moment longer to make sense of things, she would begin screaming and never stop. Afterwards, there were those first years in New York where she was cleaned houses and waited for Helen's arrival, while people referred to her as poor Jew, emaciated Jew, damaged Jew, and treated her like she was diseased and broken. Afterwards, she was an 85-year-old woman living in Delray Beach, Florida, with lemons and papaya trees blooming in her backyard. Afterwards, she began collecting half-full buckets of rainwater, bags of walnuts, and stacks of paper towels just in case. Afterwards, she had 3 great-grandchildren, 4 grandchildren, 3 children, and a husband with whom she lived with for 60 years, but who died without knowing her as a complete version of herself. Thank you.